I'd like to share that I've learned through the about regarding the Buddha Dharma and not seeing this as an academic study, but rather something that I personally have been trying to incorporate within my life, and as an NBUTS practitioner myself, how can we continue on this path together? And so thank you very much for joining me in that. So today, I wanted to talk about the notes on essentials of faith alone and notes on once calling, many calling. If you go to the next slide, it might have the okay, so these are some pictures regarding the first text that I would like to talk about, which is Notes on Essentials of Faith Alone, or what's called Yuishinsho Mon-i in Japanese. And so the reason why these two works, and then Notes on One's Calling, Many Calling, is called Ichinen Tanen Mon-i. And the reason why these two works are kind of grouped together in today's talk, but more or less, when they're discussed, they're kind of talked about together oftentimes is because these two works are commentaries that Shinran Shonin have written based on his kind of senpai students of Honen, right? And so the first one being the Yui Shinsho, the Essentials of Faith Alone, written by a person by the name of Seikaku, who is also a student of Honen, and so and greatly kind of inspired and influenced Shinran Shonin. And so Shinran Shonin then kind of creates this text that is a commentary on the Essentials of Faith Alone, known as Notes on Essentials of Faith Alone. So Yui Shinsho Mon-i. And then the next one is Ichinen Taneng. The Ryukan was another student of his, but this Ichinen Taneng debate was once calling, many calling debate was a kind of hot topic at the time that Honen Shonin was alive, along with his students. And so it's a debate that takes place. And so Ryukan creates a text on this issue, and then Shinran creates a commentary on that text, and it's known as Yuishinsho Ichinen Tanen Mon-i. So that's kind of why these two works are related to each other. And so we'll discuss them together as a grouping. So I did that on the first day as well. The Kyogyo Shomondri, Ken Jodo Shinjitsu Kyogyo Shomondri, the Kyogyo Shinsho is grouped together with Jodo Mondri Jusho. That you can consider them kind of a pairing because one is the kind of extensive explanation of the Kyogyo of the Pure Land tradition as understood by Honen and Shinran, and then the Jodo Mondri Jusho, Passages on the Pure Land Way, which is kind of a digest of this, this extensive work, right? And then the Sanjo Wasan are the three kind of sets of the Wasan that are kind of grouped together, which I didn't unfortunately get to the discussion of Shozomatsu Wasan as much as I would have liked to, but many of the themes that were kind of discussed in the Shozomatsu Wasan were discussed last night in last night's talk. And then so today with these two texts. Before I jump into Yuishinsho Mon-i, one of the comments that I received was that it was kind of nice to kind of kind of cap some of the major kind of themes and topics that were discussed yesterday in yesterday's talk. So I kind of would like to jump into a few points regarding that. The first one being the issue of Sesshu Fusha, which comes up in the Sanjo Wasan a number of times, but particularly in the Jodo Wasan, where Sesshu Fusha is translated as grasped, never to be abandoned. And in the notes, it's written that that Amida grasps or reaches for those who run away from the Buddha Dharma, who have turned their back on the Buddha Dharma, running away from the Buddha Dharma, that those are the primary targets of Amida's objective, right? And then another related term to this is the Akunin Shoku. The evil person is the primary object of Amida's salvific working. And then that goes on to a related topic of this issue of evil. What is evil and how is evil defined in Shinran's understanding? And I explained that evil can be kind of understood, or an interchangeable term with evil could be the mind of egocentricity or the human condition, to use kind of a less kind of technical word, okay? Next, I moved on to the topic of Ishiji, or more shorter version is Ishi, which is the one child. So this Ishi is one child, it is the Buddha treats me as if I am the Buddha's only child. And the way I explain that is that if there's, different people, A, B, C, D, who have their different karmic paths, that this was the specific karmic path that each person had to have taken in order to encounter the world of truth or the world of the Nembutsu. So A cannot switch out with B. And if you have, let's say, for example, a sibling, right? That your sibling in many respects is very similar to you, might have a lot of the same views as you do. And the reason for that is because a lot of your karmic upbringing, it was the same kind of set of circumstances as your sibling. However, even with someone like your sibling, even with someone like your twin brother or sister, right? Your karmic conditions are not exactly the same. And so they're not interchangeable. And so this specific path would not work for B, C, and D, right? And same and vice versa for every other one. So this specific path, this specific karmic path that this person has created is only right for this person A, right? And in that sense, then that from the perspective of truth or the world of Amida Buddha, this specific path becomes the only path in which person A was able to encounter the world of truth. And in that sense, this is how we can understand what we mean by the word Ishiji. Because when we first see this term Ishi, and it comes up in the Tanisho as well, but Shina says, I am the only person that the Buddha is speaking to, right? And so at first glance, it's very easy to think that what Shinan Shonin is saying is like, I am the person who owns truth or understands truth. You have to go through me to understand truth. It can be easily misunderstood that he's saying something like that, but actually he's saying something totally not that, different from that. What he is saying is that I am treated as if I am the Buddha's only child because I am the problem child. I am the person of blind passions. And then that's what he means by this term, one child, okay? All right, so that was that term. Then we moved on to the significance of light. And then on the first day, I talked about the significance of life. The last night, the significance of light being that, if we could imagine ourselves being in a pitch black room and we can't make our way through, but we have a flashlight and we shine this flashlight around and we can maybe make out certain things, but we can't make out everything. If there's a light that shines in from outside through a window, we can see everything instantly, right? The light instantly. And so that is kind of the comparison between human wisdom and the wisdom of Buddha, the wisdom of absolute truth. In that, wisdom of absolute truth is transcendent. It is not limited to what this small scope of my truth that I understand, the wisdom that I have. So that's the significance of light. Significance of life being the difference between life with a lowercase l, life of each person. And this goes for everybody. And then, but that there is this great underlying current, this undercurrent called great life. Great, again, here meaning dai, meaning that this is a technical term here, not just saying it's magnificent, it's cool, it's big, great, or awesome, right? But that this means that it is coming from the world of absolute truth. This is signifying absolute truth, and that this is what this great life that is the undercurrent that embraces all beings is Muryo Ju, infinite life. In other words, infinite or boundless compassion. That is what is the undercurrent or the common denominator, if you will, of all life with a lowercase l, right? And the sooner that we awaken to this understanding of great life, the sooner that we see that all lives are embraced within this one reality, right? And that changes our worldview and how we look at this world and how we re-engage with this world. And then the last topic that I'll briefly talk about is the seven masters. And I didn't get a chance to talk about each of the 7 Pure Land masters, but basically Tanluan and Shandao become kind of heavily influential to Shinnan's thought. Tanluan, what Shinnan receives from Tanluan is the logic behind the Pure Land, why that we can understand it to be that way. This is kind of a heavy topic, but we will talk about it today. So just to kind of forewarn you that it might get a little boring, that part, but it's a very crucial part for Tanluan. And then with Shandao, Shinnan receives the emotional impact, the emotional influence from Tanluan. For example, the 2 aspects of deep realization. This comes straight from Tanluan's commentary on the Contemplation Sutra, and well, it's the parable on the white path, right? That we all know, which I'll save for another time to talk about that. Okay, so that is kind of the discussion that I did last night, and I briefly glossed over today. But I wanted to see if there's anybody who had any thoughts on that, as they were kind of mulling it over last night, or might have wanted to ask something but weren't able to. Great. Okay, so we'll then move on to the Yuishin Shomoni today. And so the Yuishin Shomoni was a text that was written sometime between the years of 1250 to 1257. If you could go to the next slide. Okay, and Shinnan was at the time of 78 to 86 years old. So here he's presenting some of his most kind of mature thoughts. Okay, one of the things to kind of note is that in the Wasan and also in these texts too as well, the term jinen comes up more and more. Right? Whereas like in the Kyogyo Shinsho and in his earlier stages in life, we don't really see too much of that word coming up. But jinen comes up more and more as a way to kind of succinctly describe what is this world of absolute truth that we'll talk about in the topic of Nishi Hoshin. Okay, so there are 3 texts that make up Shinnan's notes on various concepts, themes, and works, and they include the notes on essentials of faith alone, notes on one's calling and many calling, and then notes on inscriptions on sacred scrolls, which I will not be talking about this time around. Okay, the first 2 are Shinnan's exegesis of passages in Chinese, quoted in tracts by fellow disciples of Honen, okay, Seikaku and Ryukan. Okay. And the 3rd work is a commentary on the scriptural text included on hanging scrolls described with the name Namo Amida Butsu or its equivalents, or on portraits of venerable teachers in the Pure Land tradition. This 3rd text has kind of these scrolls and these commentaries written on top and below, and kind of goes into what those are. But we won't cover that today. Maybe we can go to the next slide here. Okay, so one of the things that Shinnan talks or receives from Tanluan basically is the kind of the explanation of this world of absolute truth. So this world of absolute truth has 2 ways of being kind of described, right? And the 2 ways is the Dharma body of suchness, and then the second one is the Dharma body of compassionate means. So the Dharma body of suchness is this world of formless, absolute reality that transcends all diametrically opposed entities. It's basically oneness, okay? The world of oneness. But sometimes I feel like people get a different or misunderstand what we mean by the word or the term oneness. Oneness is not where we all hold hands and we sing like Kumbaya or something like that, right? And we say, oh, oneness, right? Oneness literally means, even down to the cellular level and beyond that it is absolutely interconnected, utterly and thoroughly interconnected. This is what Nagarjuna points out, because at some point after Shakyamuni's time and he passes away, one of his key teachings was that there is no self, right? But then some schools of thought of Buddhism said, okay, yeah, there is no self, but if you break it down further enough, there's these little things called dharmas, dharma with a lowercase d. And these dharmas are like these, I guess you can say that they're the cell, right? The cell, and these are not reducible, further reducible, and that these become the building blocks of all life, right? And that became the understanding, the common understanding, until Nagarjuna came along. And Nagarjuna refuted this and argued against this and said, actually, wait a minute, even that's wrong. The Dharma with the little d can be broken down, is further reducible, and it goes beyond what we can even understand. And that is how interconnected all things are. And that's where he comes up with his philosophy of emptiness, okay? And emptiness is basically that all things are absolutely one, okay? So I think what I'll do is, rather than read that long slide there, is just kind of point out what falls where, okay? So we did this yesterday, okay, but, oh, Dharma body of suchness. Ta, that's another word, right? Shunyata, right? Emptiness. These are all technical terms, but formlessness. But the reason why I'm talking about this again today is because this kind of lays the groundwork for why the Shinran Shonin talks about Pure Land. Because one of the questions that we get as ministers, right, is where is the Pure Land? Does the Pure Land actually exist? And this kind of helps to answer that question. So, everybody is compassionate means. So then, see, I guess I'll try to make it consistent with each other. Emptiness. So, yeah, what's the opposite of emptiness? Just be form. Shunyata. What other? Compassionate means. Okay, well, let's go with adornments. Okay, let's see if there's any other words I'm missing here. So this is the Dharma body of suchness, Dharma body of compassionate means. And these are two aspects of one and the same truth. Okay, and again, this is Tandan who's credited for saying this, and then Shinran takes this and runs with it. Okay. So this is the world of oneness, right? But I don't have any other means of explaining this term other than to draw this box, right? So then how then do we understand this, this box? Here's Amida Buddha, and then here's the Pure Land, right? And that then, it connects us, the Bombu, who is trapped within this world of attachments and blind passions, who is then unable to see past this and see this world of truth, is not able to see that, right? Is only able to see everything in accordance to one's own kind of biased views of the world, right? So then Amida Buddha tries to tell us there is something more than just what you see outside of your shell that you've created for yourself, and that cracks through is the Nembutsu. The Nembutsu does that, okay? And so the Nembutsu, Amida Buddha, the Pure Land, are all form. It's all the world of this compassionate means to try to get us to understand what this world of oneness is. This is a little bit of a tangent, but sometimes this is known as upaya in Sanskrit, hobe. Sometimes people say, well, we need to think of different ways of upaya to help other people understand the world of enlightenment, okay? Which I understand the attempt, right? But the word upaya from a Jodo Shinshu understanding is specifically referring to Amida Buddha. So we don't do upaya. The sentient being doesn't do upaya or hoben. Amida Buddha is the upaya. And that's all that is necessary. And that's from a Jodo Shinshu standpoint. So then we use words other than this, like enzukuri, right? Creating the karmic condition in which people can encounter the world of oneness or encounter the Buddha Dharma and these kinds of things. But other schools of Buddhism use this term, right? What we need to think about upaya, how we can do compassionate means. But from a Shinshu standpoint, we don't say that, okay? And so that's something to kind of keep in mind. Okay, so yeah, that was another kind of thing before I went off on a tangent. But this is the two aspects of the one Dharma truth, okay? And that's what is kind of being talked about here. So is that kind of clear, more or less? This is the logic behind that Shinan receives from Tanlan. Okay. Okay, so then the question is one of the questions I could think of that came up was Tanlan is approached by one of his students, right? And the student asks him, okay, so if everything is oneness, right, and everything is all one reality, and we're all part of this one truth, why is it then that you keep facing the West and then face the West and then pay homage in the West and then do gassho in the Western direction and prostrate yourself in the Western direction? And so it's a good question, right? Why are you picking West over North or East or South, right? Why West specifically? And so Tanlan answers this by saying that because I am a person who is incapable of understanding this world of oneness, right? In other words, jumping through this, right? And going straight to this. Because I'm a person who is incapable of doing that, again, because of my blind passions, I need something to hold on to grasp onto that will allow me to look at what this is. So this Amida, I face the Western direction because that is where the world of truth is from a symbolic standpoint, right? And that's what is pulling me towards this world of oneness. So it's kind of like he says it's kind of like putting I guess the modern equivalent would be carrots on a stick in front of the person. But the example that he uses is that if you could imagine there's like this cow or a mule or an ox, and in front of that ox you hang a bucket full of grass and you put it in front of that cow, and you do that to entice the cow to get to a larger pile of grass, and the cow will naturally follow that. So in that sense, then the Amida Buddha, the Nembutsu, Pure Land, becomes something which we can aspire towards, that we can go from this world of the defiled to the undefiled. And that becomes essentially the carrot on the stick that entices us to come to and awaken or aspire to be awakened to this world of absolute truth. Okay, so that's the example that's given. Okay, let me stop there and see if there are any questions or thoughts on that. Yeah.
When you talk about Shin Upaya, is that kind of like realization? I mean, it's not, I mean, for other, like you said, other Buddhists might use Upaya as a way to explain, in terms, their path.
Yeah.
But for Shin Upaya, then that's
Amida.
It's Amida, so it's the realization part.
Yeah.
It's the true testing or...
Right. Well, the working of Amida that tries to get us to,
I mean, because you don't have to learn anything. You just have to realize that you're grasped by Amida, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, it's like, you're not trying to figure out what the formula is and all that, that sort of stuff, which would be, kind of normal Upaya, I guess. But for Shin Upaya, it's more the feeling.
Right.
It's kind of like,
I see.
When we looked at the Amida statue at the Betsuin today, I mean, that's a form, but but the feeling is formless. I mean, it's like that awe or I mean, it's that unspoken thing inside that that you feel.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And then that also kind of ties into, as you were explaining that, it brought up something to mind that came to mind, is that continuing on from the discussion from yesterday, there is no calculation needed on our part, right? So then, is it a blind faith then? Or is it a leap of faith? Well, the calculation is in here. This is what has been calculated for us and given to us to awaken to this world of truth. So what that means is then, in Japanese, we say, Amida-san no hakarai. So the hakarai is, the calculation is done on the part of Amida Buddha, again, on the part of this world of absolute truth. That tries to pull us through Hoben to awaken to what absolute truth is. And so that's kind of something that came to mind as you're explaining that. But sorry, I went off on a little bit of a tangent. Yes, for what you said, yeah, that's to answer your question, yeah. So then what came up in day one was merit transference, right? Who do we transfer merit to, right? So from the Jodo Shinshu perspective, what's part of our identity is that merit transference is what is given to us. That is Nembutsu. And that's how we discuss this term, right? And so that's part of the Jodo Shinshu identity. Calculation is Nembutsu. That's not our calculation. Our calculation becomes a hindrance. The calculation on the part of the world of absolute truth is how we discuss that. Upaya comes from the world of absolute truth. So everything kind of like the direction changes. It's like a 180-degree turn from Shinshu and arguably the other schools of Buddhism. Okay, so that's one of the kind of key things that comes up in this text. So if we could go into the next one, next slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about is the stage of non-retrogression. This stage of non-retrogression, the practitioner will not demote in his or her level in practice on the way to Buddhahood, and this is the moment in which the finite being can come into contact with the realm of the infinite or the uncreated. So retrogressing, in other words, if you like climbed up the levels of Bodhisattvahood and you go back down, right, a notch or two, right, that is kind of what's known as retrogressing, coming back to your original state of Bonbu-ness. And not being able to elevate and go up the steps and stay in one thing. Like I know some of these video games, my son is starting to play like Super Mario, and then in these long levels, right? That they have, you have to go to these checkpoints, and when you hit this flag, there's no more coming back, right? And then you could just stay there. And the next time you quit the game and you start it up again, you start up at that next that checkpoint that you last left off of. So that's kind of how we can understand retrogression or non-retrogression. And so this was something that concerned Shinran, and it became such a problem for him when he was on Mount Hiei. He would do these practices, and when he felt like he took care of one blind passion or another, right? And then he says, okay, I can now work on these, right? And as soon as he like shifts his focus and starts to work on these blind passions are left unattended and they come back. So he constantly comes back, backslides to his original state as a Bonbu, right? And he comes to this frustration that no matter how hard he tries, he keeps backsliding. There's a famous, what's that, Greek mythology, Sisyphus. He rose this, you guys know this story? He's like this guy who's banished to like this, one of the hells or something like that from, I forget, Zeus or whatever. And there's this large boulder that he has to push up the hill. And he pushes it up, only for it to come right back down. And then he has to then start it over and do that again for all of eternity. And that's his hell that he has to kind of suffer and endure through. So this is kind of like the same situation where Shinran Shoni kind of returns back to square one with with his blind passions. So naturally, when he sees this term futaiten or non-retrogression, he keys in on this. So much so that this Futaiten becomes equivalent to the term Shinjin for him. That this moment of, again, when you realize, when you break out of that shell, that there's world outside of this shell, that that there's no coming back from that. That it is the stage of non-retrogression after that moment, and so that's what he ties this term to Shinjin. And so the second point here is a unifying time and timelessness, finite and infinite, samsara and nirvana. The practitioner touches or encounters the realm of enlightenment. But because of the vestiges of blind passions hidden beneath the surface of consciousness and obstructing it, enlightenment has yet to become fully manifest. Okay, so I've talked about this next point here. Okay, so maybe we could go to the next slide. Okay, so kind of taking the time to draw out what this might look like, so that you know, when he's these left two columns and the right two columns are set. And so the first one, if you go look at the top left quadrant here, he's climbing up the ladder and he goes up and literally goes up the mountain and he hits this glass ceiling, right? And when he hits this glass ceiling, he then falls backwards and he falls and falls and falls. And he then comes to the palm of Amida's scooping hand, right? And that's the scooping hand of Amida Buddha that he is able to encounter. So, you know, this is common for a lot of ministers to use in their Dharma talks. But you know, the mudra that's used of Amida Buddha, the standing Buddha, is that there's two hands. The one is the calling one, and the other is the scooping hand. And that scooping hand is kind of depicted right here as the scooping hand of the Bonbu. Moving on to the right to these columns here, which I kind of drew out the other day as well, is he tries to climb up and is unable to get past the kind of overcast of all the clouds that are kind of covering. And so he's unable to kind of get past that to this world of absolute truth, to enlightenment, right? So he comes down this mountain, right? Comes down the mountain and goes to Rokkakudo. At Rokkakudo, receives a dream vision. Then that dream vision of Shotoku Taishi tells him to go see a person by the name of Honen. Goes to Honen, right? And then from Honen Shonin, he receives this teaching of Kariki Hongan, right? And then this is Amida Buddha saying, tell him he is okay as he is, right? And so Amida, the Honen, tells him that this story of you know, this, you know, Ishiji, Sesshu Fusha, Hariki Honga, et cetera, right? And then so he says Namadawi and then receives his teaching and then realizes that the truth is at his feet. That he didn't have to go and try to reach for it, but it was always there with him as he was. Right? And so this is kind of the Futaiten that's being talked about here. Futaiten being this moment here, Futaiten being this moment here of non-retrogression when we awaken to the world of absolute truth. So moving on to this, the top right quadrant, in the in the Shoshinge, it says Hinyo Nikko Fu Ummu Shige Myomu An. Right, and so let me talk about that a little bit. So again, using these clouds of blind passions. Let's see. All right. I don't have like another color, but I'll use blue here. All right. So Shinran, normally the goal of Buddhism is to find a way to get past these blind passions, right? And reach the state of enlightenment where you can see the world of absolute truth. That means that these clouds have to somehow be extinguished or dissipated, right? One has to work to kind of rid these clouds of blind passions. But Shinran obviously is unable to do that and comes to a state of utter hopelessness, right? And then when he comes back down the mountain, what he realizes, right, is that beneath the clouds is not darkness. That beneath the clouds, there's still light that shines upon him. And as a matter of fact, it is because of this light that shines through the clouds that he is actually able to look up and see the clouds for what they are, right? And see the clouds as the blind passions for what they are. In other words, awakening to the human condition. That this isn't something to try to rid oneself of or extinguish oneself of. Now, these blind passions no longer become a hindrance, but actually help them to realize all the more the significance of this light, right? So these don't become the hindrance anymore. They become that which helps them to understand this light all the more, right? It's the same thing with a piece of coal, like, Kingsford coal. Now it's the summertime, we do a lot of barbecues now, right? When you light the coal, right, this piece of coal is opaque, right? You can like easily smudge your hands on it. It's very dirty, very messy, right? It's black through and through, very opaque. Cannot see through this thing. But through a spark, one little spark, that's all it takes. One little spark, this thing turns bright red over time, right? And the blacker the coal, the brighter that it shines, right? And that's the same thing that's happening here. This is also discussed in the Wasan too, right? The more the ice, the more the water, right? It's such a conundrum. At first, when you hear it, it's like, wait, does that mean like the more bad I realize about myself, the more bad that I can go do, right? That's exactly counterintuitive, or not what he's trying to say. What he's trying to say is when you truly awaken to your human condition of realizing these clouds for what they are, right? That they actually help you to understand more just how much you are embraced by the world of absolute truth, just how profound this world of absolute truth is, right? That you are embraced as you are, despite the faults that you have, despite the egocentric mind that you have. And so that's what comes up in the Shoshingen. Okay. Okay, another term that comes up is, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, Buddha nature. Do I have some writing on the next slide? Oh, I do. Okay, so Buddha nature is none other than Tathagata. Okay, this comes up in the CWS, in the Kyogyo Shinsho, but I just kind of wanted to draw out here. Buddha nature is none other than Tathagata. Okay. Maybe I'll read a little bit before that. Nirvana has innumerable names. It is impossible to give them in detail. I will list only a few. Nirvana is called extinction of passions, the uncreated, peaceful happiness, eternal bliss, true reality, Dharma body, Dharma nature, suchness, oneness, and Buddha nature. So in that list that I had earlier, I should have put Buddha nature on that side, on the left side. Buddha nature is none other than Tathagata. This Tathagata pervades the countless worlds. It fills the hearts and minds of the ocean of all beings. Thus, plants, trees, and land all attain Buddhahood. Okay, moving on over to here, this is another different page here. I'll just read from here. This Shinjin is the aspiration to bring all beings to the attainment of supreme nirvana. It is the heart of great love and great compassion. This Shinjin is Buddha nature, and Buddha nature is Tathagata. To realize this Shinjin is to rejoice and to be glad. People who rejoice and are glad are called people equal to the Buddhas. So Shinjin, or Bussho, I should say, is Shinjin. Okay, so here's another thing that another kind of Jodo Shinshu kind of identity point here. Buddha nature is Shinjin. Okay, so one of the kind of common examples that's given regarding Buddha nature in general Buddhism, or in Buddhism outside of Shinshu, is that there's a mirror, right? And the mirror is very dirty, and you have to polish that, right, to find your true self, right? So that kind of doesn't jive exactly well with this understanding of Shinan, right? Shinan's, when he talks about Buddha nature, what he's talking about is Shinjin, which we don't originally have this Buddha nature, but when upon the arising of Shinjin, that is Buddha nature. So I think one of the helpful ways to talk about Buddha nature is that there's two perspectives. Okay. In Japanese, it was called yakubutsu and yakusho. Okay, so this is the Buddha's perspective, and this is the sentient being's perspective. Okay, so from the world of truth, all beings, plants, animals, trees, as was mentioned earlier, sentient beings have Buddha nature. All beings have Buddha nature. Okay. Because according to the 18th vow, everyone is going to make it. And so by right is that means that everybody has this Buddha, the potential to become Buddha, right? From the perspective of sentient being, however, we cannot help but see things dualistically, right? And as is mentioned in that two lists there, because of our incapability of understanding this world of oneness, we have to use dualistic terms to understand it, okay? And so I'm kind of skipping over a lot of kind of explanation there. But from this perspective, Shinjin is Buddha nature. Buddha nature, okay? And so what that entails then further is that initially we don't have Buddha nature, but we then come to Buddha nature through the arising of Shinjin. Okay, so there's that two different ways of kind of looking at it. When we're looking at it from this perspective of Buddha nature, or I'm sorry, the Buddhist perspective, then all beings does have Buddha nature. From the perspective of sentient being, with Shinjin, there is Buddha nature. Of course, this is a Jodo Shinshu understanding, right? This is a Jodo Shinshu understanding of how we discuss this. But so next time we see this term Buddha nature come up in one of the books that we read regarding Buddhism in general, I think this is kind of a helpful way to kind of see it in terms of how does Jodo Shinshu define this term and where do we go from there? Right? How do we join in on the conversation of Buddha nature? How do we contribute the Jodo Shinshu understanding of Buddha nature to this conversation, right? And that's kind of what I'm trying to make an appeal to here with this idea of merit transference, with the idea of upaya, with this idea of Buddha nature, right? These are the things that we kind of have to kind of hone in on what is the kind of what we call in Japanese, the kihon, and then go from there to engage in conversation with other fellow Buddhist brothers and sisters, right? Okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you. What, already? Okay. Okay, actually, that's perfect. Okay, so I will stop there because the next slide I think will be from Ichinen Tanemon-i. So maybe I'll stop there for see if I can got a question or two.
So I guess now we will have anybody who has any questions, even for people on Zoom. Oh, okay.
Just trying to understand. Buddha nature and changing. So when you say all beings have Buddha nature, I have Buddha nature. It's just that I don't realize it.
Yeah,
and
from the perspective of truth, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When I find
right.
Shinjin.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So how should I say how other people talk about Buddha nature, right? It's not that we disagree with that, right? We do agree with that. There is Buddha nature. All beings do have Buddha nature. But as long as we remember that we're talking about that from the perspective of truth. From the perspective of truth, yes, all beings have Buddha nature, right? But for Shinna Shonin, he's talking about it from the perspective of himself as the Bonbu. And in that case, there's an added layer to that conversation. And that added layer is that Buddha nature is found within here, Shinjin specifically. And that's the only kind of thing that I wanted to point out. But yes, yeah, you're right. Yeah, from the perspective of truth, all beings have Buddha nature.
So using kind of a mathematical approach, mm-hmm. if everything has Buddha nature, mm-hmm. then everything has Shinjin, because you have an equal sign there, mm-hmm. except mm-hmm. or Shin Buddhist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but it's latent also, I guess.
Right.
Right. It's because we're bound by our web of blind passions. But
Yeah.
when you talk about the stage of non-retrogression,
Mhm.
which I think means you get to that point where you have found or realized Shinjin.
Mhm.
And once you do, then it's like the Super Mario game.
Mhm.
You're at that level and it's there, even though we're still a Bombu.
So
Or
yeah.
not. I mean, that's where I'm kind of trying.
Yeah.
Or can we ever get to the stage of non-retrogression? As humans, as living humans,
Mhm.
or is it something if you're on the Shin Buddhist path that you just don't worry about?
Right. So the thing that came up in yesterday's conversation is coming up to mind again for this conversation, which is if you found this Amida Buddha to be crucial, or you're grateful for having this teaching of Amida Buddha in your life, then it doesn't, this Shinjin is kind of irrelevant to the conversation now, because it's when you start talking about Shinjin as an object to be had, as an object to be possessed by you, then it's not doing what it's intentionally, or what's intended purpose is, right? The intended purpose of Shinjin is to just talk about this mind of Amida that has been bestowed upon you, and so it's not something to be had or attained. You mentioned earlier this word latent. I'm not sure that Shinran would use this word, because latent kind of then means that we've already had it, right? But it's an awakening that arises within us, right? And so it's not kind of dormant within us in the beginning, but rather that this outside kind of light that shines through and cracks through this wall, this wall of blind passions is what happens. And this becomes when one sees outside of this through this opening and realizes this world that is outside of one, that is then this moment of Futaiten. Right. And then Shin, or in other words, Shinjin. Yeah.
So how does kind of realizing or understanding that Amida's scooping hand is always there to catch us no matter what?
Right.
I mean, is that
part
of
so
realization?
Right.
Or, I mean, that's,
that is part of the realization, right?
And so you don't have to really worry about,
right.
Shinjin or non-retrogression or all that kind of stuff, because Amida's
that's
there.
Exactly. That's all that when you realize and you have this deep appreciation, this deep gratitude for this, that's all that matters. Yeah. So the other thing then becomes the question then people always then ask next is, well, then why do we have to study this? Like, why do we even, like, why are we breaking our backs over this? That becomes the question, right? But Honen Shoni is famous to have stated, and I have to paraphrase it because I cannot remember the Japanese for it. But he says, I have to collect my thoughts here. How does he say this? Oh, that's Shina. Yeah. That's one. You're right. Yeah, that's one. And then the other one is the moon shines down on everybody, right? The moonlight shines down on everybody. But if you don't look at the moon, you won't see the significance of what the moon does, and you will if you're looking away from the moon, you're only going to see your shadow, and you're going to be afraid of this darkness, this shadow that's cast upon you. But if you look at the moon, you'll see the glory of all this light that's shining down on you and all the beings, right? And so you have to step forth on the path. The path is there for you, but you have to go on the path and pursue the path and pursue the Buddha Dharma. And that's what allows you to understand the depth and the profoundness of this teaching. Yeah, absolutely, right? Yeah, that's the same thing too, right? Just to go on the, is to go on it and move forward with it. Okay.
Are there any other questions? Or is there a question on Zoom? I'm not looking, so no. Well, I guess I have a question for you, Sensei. Is that I think earlier Ben, Mahome Hoshin toka, and you translate it as upaya. But for many of us, words like hoben and words like upaya isn't like a familiar word.
Yeah.
So what is, I guess, as a a scholar of yourself, a word that kind of an English word that we can use to translate words such as mahoben.
What's usually used is skillful means or compassionate means. This comes up in skillful means is usually a term that comes up in kind of many Buddhist schools. Compassionate means seems to be something that Shinshu landed on specifically. But it's not across the board. I've seen other scholars of other schools of Buddhism use compassionate means, and I've seen Shinshu scholars use skillful means as well. So, but these are like the two general ones that are landed on. Yeah.
Right, and then going back to what you had said yesterday, Kana, you said that for us in the Nishihonganji, that our statue of Amida is Mahobe Hoshi.
Yeah.
So I guess to clarify for all of us here that means we as a Nishihonganji entrust in a compassionate means form of Buddha.
Right. That's correct. Yeah.
But then if we talk about Nishijinshin, the two aspects, why is it that we do not have a Hobe Hoshin and Hoshin? Yeah, Hoshin. As a Gohonzon. Like if there is that duality, but yet they are of one. But we as Nishihonganji have on our Gohonzon that is Hobe Hoshin. That where does that kind of duality exist? Yeah, I
don't think I'm following. Sorry.
You say that we say that our Gohonzon is Hobe Hoshin.
Yeah.
But if the two are of
one,
yeah. Why is it that then why is it that we only have one thing that is written on our Gohonzon?
Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so then again, then the answer of that would be, I guess you could etch in like Hosho Hoshin somewhere in the air, or something, because it's everywhere, right? It's pervasive, it's all pervasive. And so it's emptiness, right? It's ku, it's shunyata, jinen, it's pratitya samuppada if you look at it from the affirmative side. It's specifically written as Hoben Hoshin because it's this formlessness that has taken on form, and that's why it's there. But I see what you're saying. Like you could just write both on this, right? But the point I think was to make it so that this is to say that this is the form part of that formlessness, and so that would be the way that I would kind of answer that. I don't know if that's sufficient to what you were looking for.
Oh no, it was just something I had thought of, and I understand to a sense of why we focus more on the compassionate means forming in Jodo Nishihonganji. So thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that I kind of want to point that I don't think I've written in anywhere in the next lectures, but something that I do want to say is that this world of compassion is all around us, right? So then, but I do kind of want to say my doctoral dissertation was involved with Shin Buddhist ethics and what is that ethics, and I think one of the things that I came up or that I landed on was to say that we don't initiate or we don't create this compassion, right? Which is that's true. This compassion is all here, right? However, that's not to say that we don't participate in that world of compassion, right? And so we, as participants in this world of compassion, we can engage with social issues. We should think about how to engage with social issues from a Shinshu standpoint. And so that's kind of one of the things that I've wanted to mention. It's like, like surfing. Okay, that is a perfect example for here. But like surfing, right? When you see someone surfing and riding the waves, let's say that waves, the ocean is the ocean of compassion, and someone is riding on that waves and participating and moving with this compassionate ocean, right? Then we, on the people on the beach, look at that person and say, wow, that person is moving so great, so graciously, and looking like she has so much fun on the waves, and looks like they're for lack of a better word, one with the ocean, going with the ocean, right? I want to be like that. I want to do that, right? And so that person who's on the ocean inspires the people who are on the beach to then join in on the ocean. Maybe not as a surfer, maybe it's boogie boarding, maybe it's just swimming in the ocean, right? Maybe it's just putting your feet in the ocean. And nevertheless, that surfer is influencing, right? This person by saying like, hey, this is what it is to participate in this world of compassion. So we can say firmly that we participate in compassion. We may not create or initiate it, but we are definitely sharing that. And that's something that we can say that's part of our Jodo Shinshu identity as well. So with that, I'd like to end the first half. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And so it is 7 o'clock, a little past 7. So we'll end the first half of today's lecture here, and if we can take a small break and come back at 7:05, well, 7:10, around 7:10. So if you have any other questions, please, save it, write it down, or put it in the chat, and we'll come. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt your guys' discussions. I would like to start on our second half of today's lecture. And it's about time, so
check. This is working. Okay. Okay, great.
So I guess we can start the second half. Sensei, yoroshiku onegaishimasu.
Okay, so next I'd like to move on then to notes on one's calling, many calling, which is the second work that I said I was gonna move on to. So if you can go to the next slide, maybe. Okay, these are just some examples of what it looks like in its actual form. Go to the next slide. Okay, so the background of the Ichinen Tanemoni is the basic structure. Again, is the general the general structure is teaching, practice, and realization. So if it's important to say the Nembutsu, then how many times should one say the Nembutsu? In what way should one be reciting the Nembutsu? What is the appropriate time of the day to do so? And so for Honen, this recitation of the Nembutsu was the practice that would bring birth to the Pure Land for all people alike. And it's not the act of saying the name that brings about birth, but that the name is endowed, with the great compassion of Amida Buddha. So this recitation is the manifestation of this compassion that is taking place. And then practice is none other than great practice, but this working of Amida Buddha. Okay, so let me just. In Shin Buddhism, and according to Shinran Shonin, there's this commonly used phrase known as Shinjin Shōin, which means that Shinjin is the right or true cause for birth in the Pure Land. And this becomes kind of like the core of the Shinshu tradition. Shinran Shonin didn't coin this term, but it's Hakunyo later kind of runs with this kind of motto, and then it kind of holds, it sticks, and then Shinjin Shōin, and the other pattern is Shomyo Hon. Recitation of the name is expressing our gratitude to Amida Buddha, becomes the slogan of Jodo Shinshu after Shinran Shonin's passing. So prior to Shinran, though, Honen Shonin has this phrase. Nenbutsu Ihon. And so this Nenbutsu Ihon is that Nenbutsu is the basic, fundamental reason for the person being born in the Pure Land. So just to kind of line it up with this, is that Nenbutsu is the fundamental cause of birth in the Pure Land. Okay, so why is there kind of this discrepancy here between the two, even though Shinran was the student of Honen Shonin? And so the understanding again here is to say that it's within this Nenbutsu, how to understand this Nenbutsu, that Shinran's kind of distinct character comes forth. That within this Nenbutsu is packed this Shinjin. In other words, the wisdom of Amida Buddha is the mind or minds of Amida Buddha, Shishin Shingyo Yokusho, is in this Shinjin, which is in Nenbutsu. And so that's how Shinran kind of further goes to not create the distinction between himself and Honen, but gives his appreciation of Honen's teaching, of why the Nenbutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, is effective in bringing about birth in the Pure Land. And that is because contained within it is the mind of Amida. And so that's something that I wanted to point out. That's important to note here. So it's commonly known that Honen based his teaching off of his great inspiration. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Shandao. And so this is referred to as Henne Zendo, in which Honen relies solely on Shandao's teaching. Shandao was one of the first Pure Land masters to promote the idea of recitative Nenbutsu over that of contemplative Nenbutsu or visualization practices. In fact, he argued in his magnum opus entitled Commentary on the Contemplation Sutra, or also known in Japanese as Kangyo Sho, that in fact the tragedy of the story that takes place in the Contemplation Sutra was in fact an opportune historical moment for Shakyamuni Buddha to present the Pure Land teaching and encourage the recitation of the Nenbutsu as the essential practice for all. Okay, so if the efficacy of birth in the Pure Land through the Nenbutsu is not dependent on the person saying the name, then why is one even encouraged to say the Nenbutsu continuously? Especially since the sutras state that 10 utterances or even one is enough to ensure birth. And so to answer this question, Honen states, as to entrusting, you should believe that birth is settled with a single utterance. As to practice, you should continue throughout your life, end quote. And what this means is that the number of times one says the name is irrelevant. Rather, this should be understood as the practicer's attitude in saying the name. They refer to the absolute entrustment in Amida Buddha's vow, which brings one to say the name, and with such entrustment, one should say the name as often as possible. So a couple things to note here is that I talked about the tragedy of the Contemplation Sutra. What I'm referring to here is the story of Vaidehi, of Ajatashatru, who kills his dad and imprisons his mom, was trying to kill his mom too as well, but ends up imprisoning her instead. And then Vaidehi, who's the mom's name, kind of implores Shakyamuni Buddha to come and teach her about a way to break out of this suffering that she's experiencing. And then so Shakyamuni goes and lists about this prescriptive method of how to visualize the Pure Land and how to get there. And then that's the tragedy that I was talking about here. And so Shandao mentions that this story was talked about in the Contemplation Sutra precisely to be able to talk about the Nenbutsu teaching, and that it was an opportune moment to talk about the Nenbutsu and the recitative practice of the Nenbutsu. And then going back onto this issue of the number of times that matters, Honen Shonin says that to kind of break it down further, that the number doesn't matter, that you should kind of just keep saying the name. The attitude doesn't matter. It's just say, or I'm sorry, the number doesn't matter. Just keep saying the name. Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so nevertheless, the issue of the number of times one says the name became a polarizing debate, which boiled down to the basic argument. Is it a matter of faith or is it a matter of practice? In other words, is it a matter of having faith, thereby requiring only one genuine instance of a person saying the name, or is it a matter of repetition and continuous recitation that will bring about birth in the Pure Land? And so Honen's own religious life seemed to integrate both aspects of this debate. And so the matter was left kind of unclear to his disciples. Those inclined toward one's calling argued for the centrality of faith, emphasizing that birth in the Pure Land was ensured in the first instant of trust in the vow, expressed with a single utterance, and they rejected repeated utterances as a sign of doubt and irresolution. And those on the many calling side relied on the encouragement to continual recitation found in scriptural sources and on the concept of practice that is common to all Buddhist paths. And they denounced one's calling as the advocacy of negligence and presumption upon the power of the vow. So both positions deviated from Honen's teaching and caused kind of dissension amongst Nembutsu practitioners, and an extreme version of one's calling even led to friction within the larger society as well, by encouraging kind of this antinomian sentiment or licensed evil. In other words, this idea of, well, I could do whatever I want because I'm already saved, right? And so that was the misunderstanding that was created. By the way, that licensed evil comes up time and time again throughout the history of Shinshu. It even comes up to this day about people presuming to understand the vow. So this was the idea that one can, let me move on then to the next one. Okay, so Shinnan's concept of other power. So Shinnan, like Honen, took the position that the framework of one's calling versus many calling was flawed. His basic position is clear in his emphasis on the word even or naishi, which appears in the crucial phrase even 10 times and even once in the larger sutra. But suffice it to say that, there is no set number of times that the name should be said, for the validity of the Nembutsu arises from beyond any act of the person. Okay, so in other words, it doesn't matter what the person's calculation is. It's the Nembutsu itself that's what's effective. If there was to be a difference between Shinnan and Honen, it was that Shinnan emphasized the deeply rooted and intractable elements of self-attachment and blind passions within his own Nembutsu practice. Honen, however, emphasized that the merits accumulated by Bodhisattva Dharmakara over eons of practice was made the Nembutsu effective. So with the Nembutsu, a person does not gain merit by purporting practices, but partakes of the Buddha's merits embodied in the name simply by saying it. Maybe we could go to the next slide. Okay, let's see. Okay, so saying the name is meaningless here on the second point here. Saying the name is meaningless unless it has two important elements of entrusting oneself to the vow power and saying the name. If one does not have any doubt and says the name, one will attain birth in the Pure Land through Amida's vow. In addition, since the utterance of the name is the means for receiving the Buddha's virtues and attaining birth at the point of death, saying the name is naturally repeated from moment to moment and continues to the end of life. So in this way, Honen took on the debate by arguing for both positions, essentially is what he did. While each single utterance of the name suffices in itself to bring about birth, right? The practitioner should continue saying the name throughout his or her life. That was Honen's kind of approach at answering this question, by doing by kind of siding with both sides, but at the same time saying that this is kind of an irrelevant question, but if I had to answer it, I would take both of these positions and I would show you why. As mentioned above, for Shinnan, emphasis was placed on faith, but not siding with the one's calling side, but saying that the framework of this question is kind of besides the point, right? That's not what we're trying to discuss here. That even even the faith is defiled if it is based on the person's self-power. So subsequently, the problem of saying the name for Shinran was not an issue of the number of times, the frequency in which one says it, or the length of time, but rather a completely different matter altogether. The problem was whether the individual can wholly and sincerely entrust him or herself to other power in the first place. Okay, maybe we could go to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, that's what this 2 points were saying. And then, so there can be no, absolutely no self-contrivance or hakarai within entrustment, okay, from Shinran's perspective. Maybe we could go to the next slide. Okay, so for Shinran, then, even though Amida Buddha has attained all of the merit necessary to become a Buddha, as Honen explains, if the individual must make that his or her own merit, then that would constitute self-power endeavor. Rather, Shinran found that Amida's virtues works within the practicer by showing him one's true nature as a person of blind passions, and at the same time that one is grasped by Amida's working just as he or she is. So let me just stop there for a second. So Honen's approach was, if there is to be a difference, was to say that there's more emphasis in the Nembutsu, because when Bodhisattva Dharmakara was practicing for eons, was accruing the merits within the name. And so that is what we should be focusing on. Whereas Shinran was saying, that might be the case, but I can't get over my blind passions. And so my feeling behind this is not what's causing this problem about this issue, and it shouldn't be about the number of times. So it's a slight difference in how they're looking at the efficacy of the Nembutsu and where that efficacy lies, where it comes from. And with this awakening, any effort to try and make one deserving of Amida's compassion falls away, and the person fully entrusts the self to the vow for the first time. To receive Amida's virtues, then, is to receive the Buddha's sincere mind, by which one sees the self as one truly is, illuminated by great compassion, and now completely entrusts in Amida Buddha's vow power. Okay, maybe we could go to the next slide. So Shinran, in the end, all things said, Shinran rejected both the one's calling and the men calling positions because they both involve the calculation of the practicer, which constitutes self-power. For Shinran, when one encounters great compassion, one is freed of all calculation and all efforts to achieve birth for oneself. Then that person will naturally evoke the name. And this is the meaning of one's calling. Thus, Shinran redefines Honen's concept of single practice, shifting emphasis from the practice of saying the name to entrusting of oneself. And that's what we see here in this difference between Nembutsu Ihong and Shinjin Shoin. Shinjin Shoin being that when this awakening occurs, right, that there's oh, we gotta put the pens. Right. When this awakening occurs, that's where the efficacy of the Nembutsu lies. It lies in showing this person the wall itself, right? But also that this outside, that this world of oneness embraces this person, despite the fact of this wall that one has created. And that's where the Shinjin part is emphasized within the Nembutsu. Okay. So, okay, so moreover, in encountering Amida's great compassion, one is not prompted to say the name as a means to attain birth in the Pure Land, but out of deep gratitude for the Buddha's compassion. And this is the meaning of many callings. So when I drew that well yesterday, that it occurs sporadically or occasionally, and it's not something that we can calculate. Or there's that pendulum where the pendulum, when it's square in front of us, there's moments in which we have these moments of aha. And then those are the moments in which we can respond by saying the name in gratitude. And that would fall under this many calling in a sense, right? If we had to kind of work it in this framework. But that this once calling matters or is significant in that all it takes is this one time when we see and encounter this world of absolute truth. It's like, you know, that movie Matrix, where he takes the red pill, the blue pill, and he takes the red pill, and like he says, you know, there's no coming back from that, right? After that red pill. And so in that same sense, once we have this one moment that occurs, and that's all it takes to see just how thick this wall of blind passions is, but also just how bright and clear and warm this light is. Okay? And despite the fact that, you know, as I mentioned, as the pendulum swings, or that we lose that water of wisdom because we become conscious of that moment, right? Because of our blind passions kicks back in. That the first initial encountering to this truth is what is crucial, because that's what allows us to see that this world exists, right? And then thereafter, it becomes this this repetition, right? But the initial first moment is what Shinan is referring to as this one thought moment. The first encountering of this truth is what is crucially important. So let me go ahead and stop there and see if there's any kind of thoughts or on this. Let me go back up 2 slides.
In the meanness on this is too important. No, that's not what I wanted to ask about. But,
okay.
But there's a part where you said that it's kind of hopeless for the person to be redeemed, I guess. I don't know, but he said it's hopeless for the person.
So Shinan goes up the mountain, sees the hopelessness, and comes down. Not that part.
Yeah,
that hopelessness.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about that?
If it's hopeless, what do we do then?
The hopelessness is seeing the hopelessness in extinguishing the blind passions, right? And so what do we do then is to then pursue the Buddha Dharma, okay? And there's I don't know if this is what you're exactly referring to, but hopefully this will answer some questions that might be that other people might be thinking about too as well, which is that this is a term coined by Kenneth Tanaka, and I think it kind of does a good job in explaining the situation. Okay, so he talks about the difference between self-power and self-effort. And so this self-power, it has a very specific definition. A lot of people misunderstand this to think that it means everything that I do, right? That's not true. It's actually, what this is referring to is specifically referring to the belief in one's self and relying in oneself to be able to attain birth in the Pure Land. So first, what that's talking about is this is directly related to the issue of birth in the Pure Land. It has nothing to do with how you do your work at your job, or like how you treat your family members or things like this, okay? It's got nothing to do with that. The self-power is the issue of birth in the Pure Land, first of all. The second point about this is that it's referring to believing in the selves ability to attain that birth in the pure line. Okay, that's what jiriki is specifically referring to. There are different interchangeable terms with jiriki, such as utagai. Sorry, I wrote it in Japanese, but doubt towards the Buddha's wisdom. Hongan gyoku, doubt towards the Buddha's vow, or the 18th vow. There are a number of interchangeable terms. Hakarai is another one. Hakarai, calculation, one's calculation, okay? But I'll leave this part for another time. What I want to talk about is the believing in the self's ability to attain birth in the Pure Land. But there's a difference between that and self-effort. Self-effort is the idea, is pursuing the Buddha Dharma, right? And trying to understand what the Buddha Dharma means. Learning and listening, right? These are not things that Shinran Shonin was not condoning. He was not saying not to do these things. He was encouraging us to do these things. He was saying self-effort is very important. But he was saying that self-power is the issue here. That's the hindrance, right? But not self-effort. So it's not that he was saying you shouldn't do anything and just kind of sit back and relax and wait for, salvation to occur, these kinds of things. You should try to understand what the Buddha Dharma is saying. You should go to Sunday services and listen to the Dharma message and listen to the calling voice of Amida Buddha's great compassion. That's the difference between jiriki and jinryoku. But for the intensive purposes of this argument, we can call it jinriki. Okay, jinriki and jiriki. This is a term that I just put in there just for the sake of argument. But Tanaka Sensei talks about self-power and self-effort. And that there's a difference there. And I think that that's very helpful to think about this situation. Does that answer your question? Okay. No, two different issues, completely separate issues. Yeah. Thank you. Hi. Oh, yeah.
Back to the very last.
Slide. Is it go down?
Down, I guess.
Yeah, can you go down?
Next one.
Next one.
Yeah. Oh, no, next one, I think.
Next one.
Yeah. The first bullet, Shinran rejected both once calling and many calling positions. But the last bullet, and I truly understand what it's saying, with deep gratitude and so on, but then this is the meaning of many calling. What I don't understand is Shinran on the top says he rejected the once and many calling, but on the bottom,
Right.
what we are trying to accomplish, I guess.
Okay, yeah, maybe this is misleading. I should probably take this off for next time. But what I'm trying to say is that first bullet is saying that the framework of this issue of once calling, many calling is problematic, is what Shinran is first saying. And then this is trying to say, well, okay, if we do have to then work with these two kind of mindsets, that this many calling is to say that there are many instances in which we encounter this world of absolute truth, and those moments we should say the Nembutsu, right? We should say as a way to say like, oh yes, I am being guided by the world of absolute truth, and to remind ourselves that we are being guided by this world of absolute truth. Let's say we go to our memorial service, our Sankaiki or Sanji Sankaiki of a loved one that's passed away. These are all moments in which we are being guided by the world of truth. We should say the Nembutsu during these times. But it's also to remember that this one thought moment is also important of this, that all it takes is this one time, right? So the initially, or not initially, but he really wants to say that that's kind of besides the point, that the framework is wrong and it's flawed because they're both kind of presuming or taking into account the hakarai part. And that's where the problem lies. But if we are to use these terms, right, then this is the way we can understand those two sides, is what he's saying. Yeah. So it's just better not to use these words. That's the way that I would say it. And actually, next time I should probably take this off. That might not be helpful.
Is that kind of because if you do once calling and many calling is very dualistic, and so they kind of fight each other, but both actually have their place, right? Especially within the context of the Shin way of thinking, right? but do you know if with Jodoshu, like currently, when they,
Yeah.
is their kind of practice still kind of Honen like where, I mean, my
Yeah.
impression is that with Shin Nembutsu,
Uh-huh.
there's the Shinjin part
Right,
that you described,
Uh-huh.
right? The
Yeah.
formless Nembutsu, the Shinjin, and then the formed
Mhm.
Nembutsu.
Yeah.
And for Jodoshu, is it kind of more, I guess, petitionary?
Yeah.
And they don't,
Mhm.
and they don't have the Shinjin part because that was Shinran's,
Right. Right.
kind of concept.
Yeah, this is where I feel like I need to kind of have more conversation with Jodoshu priests, because I'm not sure actually to answer that question. I think that for the Jodoshu tradition, when after Honen's passing, his students kind of take on, right, and they have kind of differing opinions, and that's what creates the Seizan and the what's the other one? What? Oh, Shizeha. Yeah. And that creates two different understandings. And so right there, they're pretty different. One is emphasizing more that well, anyway, kind of it's different in their interpretations. And then again, we have to also kind of keep in mind that Shinran didn't see himself as creating a new tradition, right? Yeah, he was seeing himself as simply following Honen's teaching, and that he was just giving his interpretation of how he comes to appreciate Honen's teaching, which subsequent followers said, oh, wait, that's actually pretty different from what Shinran's tradition is now. So we should create a new tradition that's based off of Shinran's. And so that's what creates this new kind of different sect of Buddhism. But yeah, that's something that I think I kind of need to do a little bit more digging myself. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right.
And then I guess we have one from Zoom.
What's it saying? Sounds like applied compassion is an essential element in Shin Buddhism. Be driven by self-interest, desire for some form of transcendence. Just what to say. Yeah, I think that's yeah, I would agree with this term. And just to kind of, I guess, put in my own thoughts, I would think that it's our compassion is, Shinran talks about that there's small, medium, and large compassion, and this, he doesn't even have the ability to think about what small compassion is, or he doesn't even have the ability to possess this small compassion. He makes this confession in his wasan, and I think what he's trying to say is that I can't know what compassion is altogether. I cannot be completely altruistic in my actions, and that's true. We can't be completely altruistic in our actions. We think about sometimes the good that we think that we're doing is actually causing harm to some other people, right? Or that maybe we're overlooking other people's what their idea of compassion is. Our idea and definition of what compassion is might not be what other people's idea of compassion is, right? One of the big things that comes to mind off the top of my head is the burqa, how that became an issue, right? We might think, you don't have to put your burqa on, right? And like, you should have that decision, right? But in other parts of the country, right, having the burqa on, that is kind of the way in which to engage within society, and that's how they defined it. And so it's kind of, I kind of hesitate to try to impose my values onto other people's kind of customs and values and these things, right? And to say that my way is the right way, right? And that I am being the more compassionate person, or these kinds of things. I think that that's the motivation of what a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist is, to say that we understand that our compassion is extremely limited. But with this extremely limited self that I have, I'm trying my best to try to think about how to engage with society, how to think about what is a compassionate activity. And maybe, who knows, maybe it must change in the future. Maybe I can be changed. To have that kind of flexibility, I think, and also not humility, but the approach of self-reflectiveness to say, I am wrong sometimes, and perhaps am not going to be right on certain issues, right? But I'm trying my best, right, to try to think about this issue and how to move forward. I think that that's the more appropriate approach in terms of these social issues. I think, you know, I don't want to get in trouble here. So, but I'll speak very broadly. But I you know, sometimes I feel like the political climate is such that it's like you're either with us or against us, right? And I get that sense from both sides, right? And so I think that you know, with Buddhism being pitted against Christianity, and Buddhism has always been pitted against Christianity throughout its history, right, here in America and in the West. And so, you know, a lot of people come to Buddhism thinking that we should be, you know, against, you know, Christian values and these kinds of things. But, and so they tell us that, you know, or they try to sway and use Buddhist principles to sway it in a certain direction. But I think that, you know, it's, I think that we need to have kind of like this idea of saying that it's not just about you're with us or against us, that we need to kind of have this dialogue, right? And have a forum in which to have a dialogue in which we don't kind of kill each other or be at each other's throats, you know? That would be probably a more kind of Jodo Shinshu approach is what I'm thinking. That's kind of something that comes to mind for me. But to answer that question, I think that, yeah, I'm in agreement with that term. Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, so I think I've talked about most of the Ichinen Tannen that I wanted to talk about. Okay, so the last thing I would talk about very quickly here is that, you know, all throughout this week, we've been talking about, you know, what are some of the Jodo Shinshu kind of identity, features of our identity. And I think that, you know, one of the things that we can maybe look at these classes or these discussions is that what we're learning here is a new kind of language, right? We're learning a new language, and that language is the language of the Pure Land, the language of the voiceless voice. And this voiceless voice is not a typical kind of language that we would learn, right? It's a very difficult language, but we're learning this new language of the Pure Land. And that language of the Pure Land, let's call it Jodonese. We're learning Jodonese, right? And that the teacher is Shinran Shonin, who's teaching this language of Jodonese, right? And to recognize when this language is being used in the world, when it comes up, and to pick up on that, right? To see that, let's say your pet dog that you've loved for like 10 years has passed away suddenly, that language of Jodonese, right? If we can understand it, that moment then doesn't go in vain. That in that moment we are learning to speak with the world of truth and to understand that we're being taught and guided, even through something as tragic as our pet who has passed away. And so, you know, there is no kind of hakarai, right? There is no calculation. And Bruce Lee in that movie, one of those movies, says, "Don't think, feel," right? Don't think, feel. And I think that kind of like something that we can kind of get behind. Renyo Shonin is famous to have stated the following. He says, when I think, what is it? When I think we have understood, I in fact don't understand. When I have finally understood that I cannot understand, I have understood. Kokoro eta to omou wa kokoro enu nai. Kokoro enu to omou wa kokoro etaru nai. That's what Renyo Shonin says. And that's this understanding that the working of this world of inconceivable, when I realize that I'm in this bone wood, I cannot break free of this, that on my own, but that I am embraced that as I am through this Nimbutsu teaching that cracks through this shell, that it's okay that I cannot understand. When I realize I truly cannot understand, that is in which this light shines through and I am understanding. Or it's the hand that scoops up when Shinran Shoni falls through this utter state of hopelessness, and the hand that scoops him up, right? That is this understanding of I cannot understand, right? When I cannot understand, when I realize that this truth is not something that I can possess, that is the moment in which the truth kind of reveals itself to me. So that's the language of this Jodo Nis that we are learning here. Okay, so with that, I guess I'll kind of stop here to see if there's any kind of questions or comments.
Thank you, Sensei. Is there any questions or comments from us here or on Zoom? Well, I guess one thing that I liked about, more of a comment is that you introduced to all of us the Yakubutsu and Yakusho, and I think that is a great thing for us here in Hawaii, for when we read our texts. We don't often, it's not something I often hear, I guess personally I should say that, we don't talk about, when we're reading Jodo Shinshu texts, of whose perspective are we reading it from, whether we're reading it from Amida's perspective, or we're reading it from the sentient being's perspective. So maybe the next time when you guys read a sutra in English or whatever, think about who is saying it and who they are saying it to, and then maybe that would change. Yeah, it would change kind of how you perceive and understand certain things, because like Sensei had mentioned, there is two kind of perspectives and they're quite different, of who is being saved and why we are being saved. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Oh, is that a partial hand? Okay, I'll take it.
I guess for me, I'm here, want to listen to your wisdom, to try to be a sponge and absorb. And I realize, is that me there? Jindiki? That so this is my practice then.
Yeah, I guess.
From whether it's be listening to you, listening to the minister's Dhamma message.
Right.
Yeah. That is my self-effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not something that Shinran was discounting or saying that we shouldn't do. And that's a commonly misheld perception of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, that we're lazy, that we don't do anything. But it's very important for this to happen. And this is also what contributes to the conversation of what the Jodo Shinshu identity is. Which is that we are encouraged to study the Buddha Dharma. We are encouraged to engage with the Buddha Dharma. Otherwise, this stuff will not come alive for us. It'll just be words on a paper, right? And so that's something that I firmly agree with, in the difference between self-power and self-effort. Thank you.
Is that supported through Shinran's wasans or anything like that, or is that purely Ken Tanaka's kind of interpretation?
Right.
I mean, I love what he says. And I've and to me that whole thing of self-effort and listening and learning is kind of a Jodo Shinshu practice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what we along with Nembutsu, but
absolutely.
When if you don't make that commitment,
right,
as a follower, as a fellow traveler, then you're not really into it.
Right.
So we should always be trying to listen and learn.
Absolutely.
Because we're struggling, in samsara, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the only way to get the bolt, the light, is to listen.
Right. Well,
But yeah, the Shinran
Hmm.
is supported,
yeah,
doctrinally.
absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
it's so the thing that comes to mind for me is Shinan Shonin in his it actually comes from Eshini-sama in her letters. She writes Shinan Shonin goes to this place called Dokkakudo, confines himself within there, and then receives his dream vision to then go see Honen Shonin, person by the name of Honen Shonin, is talking about this new teaching called the exclusive Nimbutsu teaching. Anyway, to go see a great teacher by the name of Honen, right? So he goes, and then she says, 100日降るにも照るにもいかなる台風。100日降るにも照るにも means like 100 days, come rain or shine, or come what may in the weather, right? To go see Honen Shonin. And so he does this for 100 days, right? In my head, the way that I see that is that he doubted Honen's teaching during this 100-day process, verifying the veracity of this teaching and saying, how can it be that this whole time I was told that I have to do all these practices, but now you're telling me that there is this teaching of other power that embraces me as I am? How does that work? And so he went through this process of kind of doubting Honen's teaching. And through that, it was completely exhausted with this, right? And that comes up in Eshini's letters. And it shows in his life that this conversion from Jiriki to Tariki, from 19th and then 20th vow to this 18th vow, I think, was this pursuit in the Buddha Dharma, right? And so, I don't think that that's something that he would discourage us to do, right? Yeah. That's just something that came off the top of my head that I remembered reading in the writings.
Is there any other comments, questions? If not,
Yeah.
So this, what you said about the Jinriki reminded me of what you said last night,
Mhm.
that it's dynamic. It's it's a process where you as a follower have to participate in.
Mm.
So that's where the dynamic nature of it comes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That-
Yeah. Is that a yes? I mean, to.
That's how we engage.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Right.
okay, and with that, it's about 8 o'clock, so I guess we can call that a wrap for today.
Okay,
Thank you.
very much. Thank you.
Reverend Dr. Miyaji. And it says here, well, thank you, Reverend. Thank you, Bishop Eric. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, everybody, for your efforts for today. And please join us for tomorrow, either on Zoom or here in person. And tomorrow's theme is Shinran's letters and Tanisho. And so should be exciting. So please come. And if there's any questions, you can also send, your questions to Derek for tomorrow, and he'll talk about it. And also, please, if you're on Zoom, please come in to the BSC. You can join us in fellowship afterwards as well. So think about coming in. And please, for everybody here today, please stay and have some good food and, be able to talk to Reverend Miyaji while he is still here in Hawaii. He has a lot to teach us. So, so yeah. So that is all for today. Thank you, everybody, for coming in, and thank you, Sensei.
Thank you. Maybe we can close with Dasho then. Thank you. Please join me in Dasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.